All right, well, hello. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining today's webinar on how chambers participate in the Clean Slate Initiative. We thank you all for joining in on time and bearing with us as we figure out some of the technical difficulties and making sure that we are all set to go for the presentation today. So I did want to begin by giving just a couple of housekeeping items for you all to make sure we get through the webinar all fine. So we want to make sure that everyone, please remain on mute to help us all avoid background noises. If you're calling in on your phone and someone happens to call you, please do not put us on hold or at least put us on mute, because we don't want to hear some of the holding elevator music that happens at times, surprisingly. So just as a caution, please do not put us on hold. We will have about 20 minutes or so for each presentation, and then the last third of the call will be reserved for Q&A for you all to be able to ask your questions. So feel free to unmute yourself during that time frame to ask your question. During the presentation, if you have any questions and you don't want to forget what you want to ask, feel free to put in those questions in the chat box, and we'll make sure to get to those questions during the Q&A time. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded and will be uploaded on ACC's website. So and I think everyone who is signed up for this particular webinar will receive a link to the recording as well after. So I did want to, before I introduce our presenters, I did want to give a little bit of context as to, why we're having this conversation, why this webinar is being brought forth to you all today. The Clean Slate Initiative is a movement to empower states to automate the complex and challenging record clearing process for those individuals eligible for expungement under current state law. So I want to give some numbers to y'all to give you a little bit more context. 1 in 3 Americans have some type of criminal record, and there are more than 46,000 collateral consequences. I'm going to read that. 46,000 collateral consequences that impact people with conviction histories that create hurdles to certain career paths. Additionally, many people who have criminal histories find themselves stripped of certain rights and locked out of opportunities for housing, education, employment, social services, and other necessities. So during this webinar, we'll hear how both of these chambers are working to eliminate barriers to employment and opportunity. So the first presenter I have here today is Derek Miller. He's the president and CEO of the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce and Downtown Alliance. The chamber is the state's oldest business association that stands as the voice of business. In this role, Derek leads the business community in advocating and leading Utah's continued economic prosperity. Previously, Derek served as president and CEO of the World Trade Center Utah, helping to promote prosperity across the state by attracting investment and increasing exports. He also served as chief of staff to Governor Herbert and as managing director of the Governor's Office of Economic Development for Governor Huntsman. And our second presenter here today is Gene Barr. Gene Barr is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the state's largest broad-based business advocacy association. He oversees all operations of the Pennsylvania State Chamber and its for-profit subsidiary, Pennsylvania Chamber Insurance. Barr joined the Pennsylvania Chamber in February 2003, and he served more than 8 years as vice president of government and public affairs before being elected president in October 2001. During his tenure, he worked on many significant legislative and regulatory efforts critical to improving Pennsylvania's business climate. So without further ado, I want to pass the mic to Derek so he could begin his presentation. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Edgar, for that introduction. Good afternoon. So great to be with you. I'm going to start sharing a presentation here, and tell me if you can see that.
Yep, it's perfect.
All right. Well, as I said, it's great to be with all of you, and I appreciate ACCE and putting this webinar together on certainly an important topic. As Edgar mentioned, I'm the president and CEO of the Salt Lake Chamber. We like to say that we are capital city in name, but we're statewide in our mission. The Salt Lake Chamber actually serves as the state chamber for the state of Utah. And Edgar mentioned in the introduction that we're the largest as well as the longest standing business association. And by longest standing, just to add some context to that, we're about 140 years old. We actually predate the state of Utah. We were organized before Utah was even a state, when it was still Utah territory. So we take our mission seriously, and we're grateful for the opportunity to talk to you about our experience with the Clean Slate Initiative. You can see on this slide some of the areas that I want to cover, which includes, the business case for getting involved with Clean Slate Initiative. I'll talk a little bit about the legislation that was passed here in Utah, and then I'll conclude my remarks by talking a little bit about what I think some suggestions might be as you're considering doing this in your own state. So when we began this process in Utah, it was just about 3 years ago when we first got involved. And I put this first slide up because we decided that we would test the waters a little bit before we made this one of our legislative priorities. And by testing the waters, we went out not just to our members or the broader business community, but actually to the public at large, including in some messaging campaigns. And you can see here one of the op-eds that I wrote in our local newspaper, the Deseret News, talking first of all about the importance of giving those in society second chances. And we did that deliberately. We wanted to really build the case about the moral imperative of the Clean Slate Initiative. And the reason that we did this, I'll just confess, was because we didn't want to start right out of the gate making this sound that it was only for crass business purposes that we were interested in this. And it was certainly true. Our interest was more than just the economic imperative. It really was this concept of helping to give people a second chance in their life. And that was our first step forward in our messaging campaign. The other reason why it was important that this was our first step is that, as you may expect, Utah is a very conservative state. It's one of the most red states in the country, and Republicans dominate the political landscape. And Republican Party has supermajority in both in the House, in our state legislature, as well as the Senate, and they hold all of the statewide offices. And I only mentioned the political part of it because I tell you honestly, I was not sure 3 years ago how our very conservative state legislature and very conservative other statewide elected officials would react to this initiative. We're very much a law and order state, and I wondered how they would respond. And so that was another reason why the first step forward that we took here was one of the moral imperative. I'll talk about it a little bit later about what their response was, but as you may expect, given the fact that I'm on this webinar and it actually passed our state, we did have success. In addition to the moral imperative, we wanted to talk to our members, talk to our elected officials, and talk to the broader community about the economic imperative. So this slide is meant to demonstrate what all of you are experiencing in your communities, and that is the labor shortage. And that really summarizes what the economic imperative was. We need more people in our workforce. But I hasten to add that this is not a pandemic challenge for Utah. This was a challenge even prior to the pandemic. In fact, going into the pandemic at the beginning of 2020, Utah's unemployment rate was 2.5%. So most economists would tell us that we were below what is considered full employment. most of the businesses that I spoke to back in 2019 and 2020, even in 2018 when we began this process, were telling us that finding people was a challenge for them. And so we continue in the state of Utah as one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, currently at 2.2%. In addition to that, we have the highest job growth rate in the country. So we're getting pulled in two opposite directions. On one hand, our unemployment rate is too low, and on the other hand, we're adding jobs to our economy at a rate of 3.7% averaged over the past 2 years. So as I said, this was an economic imperative for us as well. So for us, this was all about maintaining a strong economic ecosystem. And we all know, we all live in the chamber world, so we all know what that ecosystem is supposed to look like. And at any given time, we're focused on one area of making sure that the ecosystem stays strong. An ecosystem is fragile. And if one component isn't working well, then none of it's working well. And so it's important to us that we're able to bring employees back into the workforce, not only, again, for the economy, but for them and for themselves and for their families, so that it gives them a renewed sense of purpose in life. And that has certainly borne out to be true with our involvement in the Clean Slate Initiative. So as I mentioned, this is an example of a message that we send out to all of our members, because one of the important steps in our experience with the Clean Slate Initiative was, I talked about sort of tilling the ground and getting people prepared for this concept, but we also recognized that it was important to communicate to our members along the way. And so once the bill was actually signed during our 2019 legislative session, we were constantly communicating with our members about what this meant for them. Prior to the Clean Slate Initiative, the Chamber with other partners had held what we called an expungement day. That was intended to assist those people who needed that assistance to go through the process, to pay the expenses and the fees, and to fill out the paperwork. We're grateful to say that under our law that's currently in place, that is no longer needed because it'll happen automatically. But again, this was just an idea of, or an example rather, of one of the messages that we send out to our members. The second half of that message gives you an idea of the waiting period in Utah and the type of offense. It was really important for us as we negotiated this bill with our legislature that there was enough time for someone who did have a felony conviction to demonstrate that that was no longer a problem for them, that they'd reorganize their life. And that was important because, as you all know, when a record is expunged, they are considered to no longer be convicted of that crime. There is no more criminal record. There's not a footnote, there's not an asterisk that says that it's been expunged. When it's expunged and when it's clean, it's clean. And so in negotiating this bill with our legislature, it was important that we all had a common understanding of that, and especially that these time periods were something that we could all agree with. So let me just wrap up here by highlighting a couple of suggestions that I might share with each of you as you consider doing this and undertaking this effort in your own communities. These were some of the considerations and the challenges that we felt like we had to overcome and that you may experience in your own community. So the first one is we knew that there would be challenges, as I said, in our very conservative legislature. And so we wanted to make sure that we got the messaging just right. That meant that we had to work with our legislature as well as the public at large to remove the stigma that's often associated. And the way that we were able to overcome that challenge was specifically talking about the importance of second chances. It's often said that America is a country of second chances, and so that really resonated with our population. In fact, I have to say that even though we negotiated this bill, and of course you negotiate every bill with your legislature, from the public at large, we didn't receive any negative feedback there, for the messages that we sent out, for the op-eds that we did, for the earned media that we garnered. We didn't have anyone contact us and say this is a really bad idea. So we felt good about that. We also had to work closely with our employers because, as you know, most employers require people applying for a job that they check a box. And as Edgar already mentioned, 1 out of 3 are going to be checking that box if they're being honest. And so the other element, even if they're not having them check a box, they may often be doing a background check. 90% of these convictions, 90% of background checks would show even very minor offenses. And so it was important for us to work with employers so they understood what this law would do. And in addition to working with the employers on that issue, we wanted to make sure that we also worked with employers on removing the stigma or the complacency that they may have inherently to hire these folks. And it would be understandable if there was a concern from some employer who would say, well, now I'm not going to be able to see this information. And so again, communicating and working out what this actually meant to have their record expunged was important. And then finally, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but the process, at least in Utah, is extraordinarily complex. And it can also be cost prohibitive for someone to go through the traditional expungement process. And so even if they were eligible for expungement, many times we found that people weren't going through the process either because A, they didn't know about it, B, it was too difficult, or C, they didn't have the funds to do that. So they were caught in this very negative cycle. And we were grateful that this expungement process and the Clean Slate bill that passed in Utah was able to help them get out of that. So second to the last point I want to make is just, again, recommending some action steps that you may consider in your own community. It was really important for those who are interested in the Clean Slate Initiative that this be a business-led effort. And it was important for us that it be a business-led effort as well. And so when they approached the Salt Lake Chamber, those who were interested in this approached us. We were on board, but we also worked with our local chambers, our regional chambers, and our metro chambers in Utah to make sure that they felt good about it as well. It was important that we got buy-in from the employers, as I discussed earlier, and removing a stigma about hiring people who may have been convicted in their past. And we, in addition to involving the chambers and other key businesses, we wanted to make sure that there was nobody who was a business voice who was going to be a voice against this. And the last thing that I will share is just how important this is to our economy and to the individuals. So I'll just end where I began, and that is that there really is both a moral imperative as well as an economic or a business imperative to this. It provides a lot of benefits to the community, including reduced recidivism, lowering the cases in the courts and their workload. And of course, it provides those benefits to the individuals as getting rid of that mark on their criminal record and giving them a second chance, literally a second chance to re-enter and contribute to society. This was an important thing. We're grateful that we were involved with it. We're grateful that our legislature saw the vision. We're grateful to our governor who signed it. And I'll just say to conclude that the bill that we passed had an implementation of 2020 originally, but ended up getting delayed because of COVID. But the state agencies now who are in charge of this are just now beginning at the end of 2021 to start to clear some of these first cases after this period of time that needed to lapse per the legislation. And so we'll be excited for the next webinar to report back about some of those individuals who've been able to get hired into the workforce. Thanks again for having me. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague from Pennsylvania, Gene Barr. Gene, take it away.
Eric, thanks. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Pennsylvania experience, and I'm going to, a lot of what I'm going to say is going to emphasize and re-emphasize a lot of the things that Derek has stated, which has been, let me pull up the right one here. Interesting experience. So we were the first state to pass Clean Slate. It passed in 2018. Ours is a bit different, and actually, Derek's activity has focused on and added a lot of things that we're working on here to add to the original passage here when we passed Act 56. Ours is summary offenses, most nonviolent misdemeanors, most crimes committed as juveniles. I say most because there are some exceptions to this, and arrests that did not result in conviction. It's sealed after 10 years. Ours is not an expungement. Ours is basically closed off to employers and landlords, such as Derek said, if you are applying for a job, you can state truthfully that I don't have this conviction because the employer and the landlord can't get at it. Law enforcement can see it. That was deemed to be, which I'll get into here momentarily, one of the ways we had to act to try and get this passed. Very similar to what Derek said. Others wanted us in. We got in because we wanted employer liability protections, and that was included as part of the original Act 56 as well, which really started us in. But as Derek said, others want us in because we give that stamp that says that there's a clear respectability from those working in the chamber world. And our engagement began when we wanted to make sure this bill was put in. And we were concerned about hiring because with our litigation climate, I always tell people that those of you who heard the old joke about Philadelphia lawyers, here we live with them every single day. And so the civil justice climate is one that can be very difficult. We wanted to make sure that if you as an employer took the chance to hire somebody that had some type of background that could cause an issue, that if they wound up hitting a customer, you weren't going to be held liable because you took a chance, particularly when you may not have known. But what really drove us into this was, much as Derek said, that our workforce problems began pre-pandemics. Workforce was and is still the number one issue, even going in, and it has simply become what I'll call a crisis now. And so we knew we had to prioritize that. But there were a few other things that kind of got us in as well. I completely agree. And one of the things that I tell people all the time, this is the right thing to do, and it's the moral thing to do. I heard a guy one time speak about his experiences in trying to get a job with his background, and his answer, which is his question, which has stayed with me, is, how would you like to be judged for the rest of your life on the worst day of your life? And that's a question that I asked myself all the time as we got involved in this effort. I also began a relationship. A guy approached me out of nowhere, said, I want to talk to you. Long story short, I developed a friendship with this guy. It turned out he had spent 25 years in federal prison on drug kingpin charges, and he came out and rebuilt his life. And just working with him made me see the reality of exactly what this means to people and how critical it is. And so we had been working. Unfortunately, he passed away 2 months ago, but his story has stayed with me and has had a real personal impact on me, such that when he actually had me going to a couple of our state correctional facilities to visit people and work with them. One of them, believe it or not, I actually got to see a Bill Cosby stand-up routine, because it happened to be the state correctional facility where Bill Cosby was imprisoned at the time. A little interesting sidelight. But going around and seeing that and talking to some of these folks, he had a guy working for him who came to me one day and he said, everyone talks about trying to help us. You guys at the chamber actually did. And it's when you get those reactions from people that really tells you this is worthwhile, and that the work we do, how significant the work we do really is. As Derek said, a lot of conservative groups are involved in this, though, because whether you look at it from the moral side or the right side or the smart side or whatever it is, they see the reality for no other reason than a financial position. as Derek's slide said, this reduces a lot of the costs that we see affiliated with the criminal justice system. And it just makes, perfect sense from that perspective. As noted, you have to make the case with, with your members. We were very fortunate with this. We convinced our members this is quite clearly a workforce issue. As noted, we had no pushback from anybody, and I'll talk a little bit about what some of the practical ramifications and positives have been with this. We never got any blowback whatsoever. Clearly, there's hurdles passing any legislation. I've been doing, some kind of political work for 45 years. One, I've never worked on the perfect bill yet, so that's one thing. And two, there are always issues with a bill that you've got to work through. From our perspective, we had to work through law enforcement. Some of the things that we had to compromise on. The organization that was most directly engaged in this was the District Attorneys Association, and they had some great perspectives, and they wanted to add certain things and clarify, and we did. We also worried about some of our traditional allies in the House and Senate who are, as Derek pointed out, conservative. You wonder how they're going to act, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the ramifications of that. For us, there's really been no ramifications, but I'll kind of tell you, which is something you can look at to see how that might play out. These are some of the things that we did in terms of trying to assist in getting this passed. We did webinars in 2018 on reentry and employment. A lot of public functions advocating, explaining what the legislation did and didn't do, trying to push that forward. We also offered to serve on the PA Workforce Development Board's reentry committee. The governor, to his credit, I guess it's 3 years ago now, just about, his number one message in his annual budget address was workforce, which we had convinced him to do. He appointed me to co-chair his Workforce Development Command Center, and we've been doing extensive work on addressing hurdles, and specifically criminal justice is one, and also working on licensing reform, which is another key piece of this for folks coming out, because you've got these moral clauses in a lot of the licensing issues, and working through those so those people get trained and can actually come out and get work in there, which was the occupational licensing reform that we've taken a significant lead on. As a result of this, we are very pleased to get a state award and a national award for our work on passing Clean Slate. And what the result has been of this, according to the Pennsylvania State Police, because this law has been in effect for a while, 40 million cases have been sealed. That is, they're closed off to employers and landlords. This is 61 million offenses. And to go to the point about how many people have had issues, this has impacted 1.1 million Pennsylvanians. So we've, in our view, helped to bring, large number of people, increase their employability options in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And of course, these are anticipated to go up more. And if some of the other reforms I'll touch on in a minute come in, we can anticipate that more will be brought in as well. What's it meant for the chamber? This has been rather interesting. So it's helped us to develop relationships with non-traditional constituencies. The people who gave us the state award are basically one of the legal services organizations we had very little to do with, and they recognized us that year as receiving their, I forget what category they put us in, but we got an award from them. It's a group that we never would have done anything with. In addition, it's changed much of the public perception of our organization. Look, you guys hear this as well. Yeah, you guys are the ones that fight taxes and try and change labor laws, and you guys hate red tape. I get it. This is the kind of thing that you can come in and change how people view your organization. For example, this, along with our work on things like early learning and childcare, has really brought us and developed better relationships with people that we might not have had that relationship with, and changed and said, okay, you guys are just not the anti-people. You guys actually work to try and get stuff done. It has helped us significantly in our relationships with a lot of those in the Democrat caucuses, particularly Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which is where most of the Democrat members are. With our Democrat governor, our relationship is really good, and he's very liberal, but it has helped us significantly in that. And one of the really neat things is every year we do a very large dinner. In non-COVID years, we get about 1,600 to 1,800 people for our annual dinner in Hershey, PA. We bring in pretty big speakers. Well, we also have, the last few years, have done a civility award in conjunction with Allegheny College, which also has given the National Civility Award. So we gave the award to the 4 members of the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus, and Allegheny College said, we really want a diverse set of recipients for this. They always did too. Had to be people who are passionate about what they do. They are very partisan, but act with civility in terms of their partisanship. So we gave an award to each of the 4. So there was a white woman a white Republican female from Western PA, a white Republican female from Central PA, a Black Democrat senator from Philadelphia, and a Black Democrat House member from Philadelphia. And the folks at Allegheny, this is just wonderful. This shows the diversity and civility that we were trying to get at. So it allows you to do a lot of other things that work from a non-traditional basis. What happens from here? That's a great question. We had what we thought was a really good idea, and we had a plan in February of 2020 to do a series of one-day events across the state, beginning in Philadelphia, in which we would invite members of the reentry community in, explain what their rights were under Clean Slate, explain exactly what they could do and not do, help them on interviewing skills, bring in people who could provide clothing. One of the things that we found as part of this, so many people who are in those straits really don't even have decent clothing to go to an interview and actually need interview clothing. So we're in the process of setting that up. Also in the process of working with our members to set up a job fair, where our goal being, you got people coming back into society from the criminal justice system. We tell them what their rights are. We help them how to interview. We get them clothes to do it. And then we set up a job interview right on site. So they walk in the door unemployed, unsure of what they're going to do, and they leave that meeting with a job. That was our hope until this COVID guy took over. So we hope to do that again in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, a couple of other cities. So we're really hoping to do that and pull that back together once we're able to do these. We do have other reforms we're looking to do. A lot of them were already in Derek's, and we're looking at things like probation. Probation becomes a pretty major issue when you've got people who get sent back for a fairly minor violation. For example, maybe your best worker doesn't show up at 8 o'clock on a Monday. Well, he or she actually had a traffic incident on Sunday, and they got sent back because that's a violation of the probation. We're trying to get some legislation in that says you can only do that for a significant violation, because many people do get sent back for what I'll call non-significant violations of probation. There's a push to do nonviolent drug felonies as well. That was not included in the original. And the other thing that we're working on is trying to do a second chance jobs board as well. When I say much of this has become transactional, I say this for this reason. This is the one thing that we have found, and maybe Derek doesn't find it because he's overwhelmingly Republican. We have a Republican House, Republican Senate, Democrat governor. Frankly, what we were finding was, as we moved to do more reforms, and this is, I'm not sure exactly how to resolve it, but we're working on it. We had a lot of Republicans say, hey, you know what, I voted for Clean Slate, happy to do it, but no one in my district is clamoring for criminal justice reform. And I had bills that I wanted to do, and none of the Democrats voted for it. So we've been trying to be the mediator for a lot of that, to try and get the Democrats to say, look, if you guys want to do something, you're going to need Republican assistance again, and you're going to have to vote for some of their stuff too, because in their words, they're voting for your stuff. That may be unfair. You can claim that this is for all of us, and certainly I'll go along with that because of the broad appeal and the broad benefits that it has. But again, just for those of you who do wind up lobbying in this, know that just everything else is transactional, and this is no different, from that either. So the last thing that I'll close with is one of the benefits that our members have seen. When I talk to our members who have made a concerted effort to hire reentrants, I hear the following. They are the most loyal people they've ever hired. Their retention rates have gone through the roof. And the reason they're loyal is that you're the one that gave them a chance when no one else would. retention rates have gone through the roof, which is extremely important when you consider the current climate. We have one company in particular that was entered into a contest for their work with the U.S. Chamber, and they've developed basically a managerial advancement for reentry candidates. They've done a phenomenal job with that. I've not heard a single negative about any of these companies that have made a concerted effort for this. So they've all found it to be a positive. Again, just to summarize, which I think Derek and I would both agree with, it's a smart thing to do, and it's the right thing to do. So with that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you, Gene, for both those presentations. Very informative, very great. Really excited to hear all the great work that's happening in both of your states and regions. I just wanted to open up to the floor to see if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask. Feel free to unmute yourselves or put it in the chat. I guess I'll ask a question while everyone, thinks about theirs. I think the one thing I always hear when working with ACC's membership, all our chambers that we work with is, how, I think both of you touched upon this a little bit, but how did you get your board to get the green light in terms of this is something that you should get involved with? A lot of the times we hear is that, a lot of the board of directors for certain chambers can't see the reasoning behind this. And a lot of the times certain chambers are able to sway their board is either through storytelling or either to take them to a jail visit. So what do you think in your communities resided with your board the most when it came to, pushing this work forward for Clean Slate Initiative? I'll begin with Derek and I'll pass it off to Gene.
So maybe I'll just explain quickly our processes as it relates to going to our board on policy issues. We have what we call sort of our 4 cornerstones of our agreement with our board, meaning if it's a policy that's within those 4 cornerstones, we don't feel compelled to go to our board to advocate for something that's clearly within those 4 corners. So, that may be a taxation regulation issue, sort of your fundamental typical Chamber of Commerce issue. If it's something that's outside of our 4 corners, then we go to the board and we have a discussion. As I alluded to in my presentation, I didn't just feel that this was outside. I felt like it was really outside. And so I was actually a little nervous when we first brought this up with the board, but they were completely supportive. I think the only question that we got on it was, why is the chamber leading this effort? Meaning, we had partners and others that were doing it, but, just because we hadn't done something in this area before, now it's not unique at all for a chamber to be involved in criminal justice reform. But and maybe this was different for Eugene in Pennsylvania, but for us in 2018 to be involved in something that was under the category of criminal justice, it was just the only question we got is, why is the chamber involved in this? But once we talked about those 2 issues, the economic imperative and the moral imperative, it was not in question at all.
Yeah, not too dissimilar. We have pretty broad-ranging policy. Our policy position is we develop policies across the board, and we have a lot. Some would maybe argue too many, but that are reviewed and recommended for change and modification every 3 years. So when we look at it, we have pretty broad range to kind of do whatever. So far, my board hasn't regretted that. We didn't want to give them reason to do that either. So we basically said it's a workforce issue. And we didn't even say, hey, can we do this? Like Derek said, we've got what we call 3 pillars as part of our Bringing PA Back initiative, which is infrastructure, competitiveness, and workforce development. But this passed even before we came up with that. We simply said it's a workforce issue. We believe we ought to be in it. I mean, there might have been a question about, are we too far out front? But I think that our guys have, as much as, as I said earlier, like to be changed, particularly now, we've got some younger board members and chairs, like us changing some of the issues we're working on. They're very supportive of ESG issues. And so this, granted, we did this again, even before that, but I think our work here helped guide us into some of the activities that we're doing on ESG now. So I never got, as I said, I never got any blowback whatsoever. We have fairly free reign within reason, but no real issues whatsoever.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask? I have another question, but I don't want to take all the space. All right, I'll ask another question. So I think some chambers, maybe even on this call, but I know our vast majority of our membership say, I don't know where to start. This is good. This seems a little bit overwhelming for me to even think about how to even get involved in this space. So the question I have for both of you is, what recommendations would you give to someone who is trying to get involved in this space, and what type of partnerships would you recommend they utilize when trying to get involved in this space? Begin with Derek again and pass it to Gene.
So interestingly enough, this issue came to our attention through our Realtor Association. And, Gene talked a little bit about this and their licensing reform. We had a Realtor Association that found that a lot of their members had to go through, kind of a rigorous process because they had something in their past long time ago, fairly minor, but it had just become sort of cumbersome for them. In addition to that, they felt like they had a lot of prospective members who were being held out of the market because of something like this. So it came through a partnership. The Realtor Association in Utah is a very powerful lobbying group. There's more members of our legislature that are involved in real estate than any other profession. And so we knew that this was, not just an important issue, but it was going to be a pretty good issue. We had a good chance of success tackling it because of that. But that's part of how we got started. We were brought into it, but then we were asked to take the lead on it because obviously we represent a broader constituency than just one industry or one profession. And for the reasons I've already said, we were happy to do that. How we actually got started once that happened was sitting down internally as a team and just talking about what is the right strategy here, what's the right messaging, what will resonate. So I don't want to repeat myself, but the outcome of that discussion was, instead of leading with it's the right thing to do for the economy, let's lead with it's the right thing to do for people.
Yeah, as I noted, we got involved because a bill had been introduced that caused us some issues because of its lack of employer protection. So when we sat down with the group pushing it, turned out to be a lobby firm in town that we had a good relationship with, brought their clients in and said, we can work on that, but we'd really like you guys, because we want the chamber involved. We want you guys involved as well. So for those of you from, if there's any other state chambers on, or any local or metro or regionals, and this is something that's of interest, I think a couple questions ask of yourselves. Do you have policy now that would indicate this is something you ought to be involved in, should be? Maybe have a discussion with your executive committee, full board. Hey, is this something you guys want to do? Look around your area and see who else is there. A lot of United Ways are now doing this as part of their efforts to engage on a workforce and to, again, to go back to what Derek and I have talked about, the moral and right thing to do here. A lot of those are looking for partners, so that way you don't have to go in on your own. So there's a number of different ways of doing this. It kind of depends on your comfort level. the willingness of your board and organization to actively engage, and what else, what other partners in the community might you be able to find?
Perfect. I do have two questions that came in through the chat, so I'll ask them. In terms of the bills in the state legislature that were introduced, who did you all contact at the state legislature to introduce those bills?
Well, as I mentioned, our partnership was with a very strong lobbying group. So we went right to the top. We went to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, and they were both supportive of it. I don't know if this is unique to Utah, but typically we don't have the Senate or the President or the Speaker that run their own bills. They'll assign that to somebody. And so they assigned it to somebody they figured could get it across the finish line, and that turned out to be true.
Yeah, as I said, it was introduced on us. We didn't move to have it introduced, but once we got involved, we were a very active partner and a respected partner coming in, and a welcomed partner, when we did this. The question in there about, I see there's a question about what we're doing to upskill. As I said, we work with the reentry committee on this. This issue of upskilling and training is one that we've been working on just generally. And it's one that is probably one of the biggest things all of us can work on as well, to get people the skills and training they need to become successful.
And to go off that question, who are your partners and what role does the chamber play versus those partners?
Just a clarification on the question, is that specific to what Gene was talking about on the training efforts, or just partners in getting the law passed?
I think it's specific to Gene's effort, but I think for in terms of legislation and getting the law passed, I think that would be helpful to hear as well.
So I already mentioned who we partnered with to get the law passed, but with regards to training, we work very closely with our governor's office of economic development, and they have access to a lot of funding. So our partnership is really making the connections to the businesses, understanding what their needs are. But it's similar to Gene, and in Pennsylvania, it's a broad-based effort. It's not specifically targeted to those who are going through the Clean Slate expungement process, but certainly they have access to those retraining programs that we partner with state government.
Yeah, the upskilling and retraining, as I said, is one of the biggest things we all face. Part of this workforce command center that I had talked about is for us to do a reassessment of something called Career Link, which is what the state has done. Kind of a jobs board to connect people. It has varying degrees of success, as well as our workforce investment boards that are scattered across the Commonwealth. In our view, we're doing a reassessment of how valuable all of them are. I hear from our local chamber partners in different parts of Pennsylvania. One will tell me that our WIB, Workforce Investment Board, is absolutely awesome. They work with us all the time. Another one will tell me they don't even listen to us. They don't even take our recommendations. So it's all over. One of the things that I've asked as part of my involvement with this command center is that we bring in an organization that has no tie whatsoever right now to the Commonwealth on a workforce basis, to do an assessment of how well we're doing on things like upskilling, reskilling, training, retraining, et cetera. Because one of the worst things I think you do is you bring in an organization, or you bring in a consultant that has put together a program for the state. You're not going to get an honest assessment. They're not going to say, yeah, that program we charge you $25 million for, it's really horrible. I don't know why we ever did that. So bring in somebody who has no tie and get them to do an honest assessment of how well your state or how poorly your state's doing, and look at other states that are doing really well and see what you can frankly steal from them.
I have a question. Where do you recommend I look for data or resources that I can use to build my case with my membership or my community, some language or messaging that resonates, or other resources that might be helpful in this?
There's a few different groups. Derek, I don't know whether you partner with any of them or not. There's the, I have to think about it. I know the one that Van Jones is running He's chairing one that's funded by a lot of pretty wealthy people. There's some information on there, and there's a few others. I'd have to dig those up, but there's 2 or 3 national organizations that are actively involved with this and can probably give those. I'll try and get some of those over to Edgar for that. But there's a number of them that are out there.
And Edgar, you may know this as well, just through ACCE, but the group that we got our data from was the Zuckerberg Foundation.
I think the one organization that Van Jones has, the Reform Alliance.
Reform Alliance, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went up to their, actually got my kids really excited because I went up to the launch in New York, and my kids had to explain to me who Meek Mill was, which was kind of interesting. And some guy named Jay-Z. I said, hey, who's Jay-Z? My daughter said, well, you know who Jay-Z is? You know who he's married to? I said, I don't know, Mrs. Jay-Z? I don't know. I was kidding on that one. I did know who he was married to, but yeah, so there's a lot of people that are really behind the Reform Alliance. I'm not sure exactly how, I haven't had contact with them for a little while, but they probably do have some information that would be beneficial.
Yep. Great resources. I think the Vera Institute are also good resources to take a look at. The Alliance for Safety and Justice is also a great resource for you all to check into and see where they're involved in their states. And I believe then in the federal government, they have the Council of State Governments, I believe it's called, and they have a really helpful newsletter that you could all sign up to just to see, how they're involved in each state and, what each state is doing in terms of expungement relief or, criminal justice reform overall. So definitely recommend those. So I'll probably have one last question in the chat, and then maybe we'll just go into final closing sentences. So I have, speaking of funding, were there hard costs associated with your efforts? If so, what should chambers consider in terms of budgetary impact?
So the groups that came to us and asked us to help us provided the funding. The only hard cost was staff time that we spend on the Hill lobbying for it.
Yeah, similar. We had the same, and in fact, we one of the groups actually gave us a grant to assist with some of the offset on staff time.
Yeah, that's what happened with us too.
Well, thank you both. I guess I'll just pass it back to you guys if you have any last things you would like to say to close off the meeting. Final wisdom to part.
Well, I just want to say thanks for inviting the Salt Lake Chamber, myself, to present on this topic. It's something that's really important for us. And I really liked what Gene said as far as showing a softer side of the chamber. Sometimes we do get accused. I don't believe it, by the way, but we do sometimes get accused of, being hard-hearted capitalists. This was a nice chance for us to show that we really do care about people, which is true. And what's good for individuals is good for the economy, and what's good for the economy is good for families and communities.
Yeah, completely agree. And, similarly, we all see things and we can see the benefit of much of what we do. But when you work with some of these folks and you see the people who are working hard and still having a difficult time because of a past problem, to see them get through that and to be successful is a great story, and it really makes it all worthwhile.
All right. Well, yeah, again, thank you both, Derek and Gene, for participating in today's webinar. Everything you shared today was very informative, very helpful. And just as a reminder for folks, today's webinar is recorded and will be listed on ACC's website within maybe by the end of the week, by Friday, so about 24, 48 hours. And you'll see copies of the presentations as well too for you to review on your own time. But as final things to say, the best way to get started is just to get started. You'll find that there's lots of issues and challenges that you'll end up finding as you do this work. And the way you can learn is just by doing this work and finding out the challenges and connecting with folks in your community. I've seen other chambers across the country, I think in Charleston, in Oklahoma City, even in Los Angeles, they organize jail visits in their communities. And sometimes that organizing your board, organizing your community to visit a jail gives them a whole new perspective as to, this is something that we should get involved with, because nothing gives you better clarity than actually stepping foot a federal prison or a state prison as well. So as always, ACC is a resource to you all. If you have any questions around, Clean Slate Initiative or any smart justice policies or ways to get involved programmatically, let us know and we can connect you. But thank you all for joining. Hope you have a great rest of your week and a happy holiday season. Take
Thanks,
care.
Everyone.